I spent 10 years saving to pay off $98,000. My parents call me the reliable asset, while secretly giving $369,000 to my sister. So there I was, 35 years old, staring at my laptop screen like it was a face of God himself. Digital confetti was falling across my monitor, and right there in the middle, in big bold letters, "Congratulations! Your student loan balance of $98,000 has been paid in full. 10 years, 120 months of rice and beans, skip vacations, and that one car that died 3 times, but I kept resuscitating it because a new one wasn't in the budget. 10 years of watching my friends buy houses while I rented a studio apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cat. But I did it. I actually did it. I cracked open a $3 beer to celebrate. Yeah, $3. Even in my moment of financial freedom, old habits die hard. I took exactly 1 sip before my phone lit up with Dad's name. The timing was so perfect, it was almost beautiful. Like watching a nature documentary where a gazelle finally reaches the watering hole, and boom, there's a crocodile. You knew it was coming, but man, nature's timing is impeccable. Dad's voice came through with that specific tone of concern mixed with defeat. You know the one. The voice that says help is needed, but pride won't let them ask directly. His furnace had died. Again, the repair guy quoted $1,200. Mom hadn't slept all night worrying about it. But don't worry about us. Son will figure something out. I looked at that congratulations message on my screen. I looked at my $3 celebration beer. Then I closed my eyes and felt the trap snap shut around my ankle with precision of a Swiss watch. You could set your calendar by the financial apocalypse beginning right after any personal victory of mine. I told Dad not to worry. Send me the repair guy's information. I'd handle it. And just like that, the bank of Mike issued another loan. 0 interest, no repayment schedule, and most importantly, 0 expectation of ever seeing that money again. The confetti on my screen seemed to mock me as I transferred the money. My buddy Jake asked me about it later that week over drinks. Actually, he didn't ask. He just looked at me with that knowing expression, the one that says he'd heard the song before and knew all the lyrics. That's when the floodgates opened and 10 years of financial family history came pouring out. Let me paint you a picture of how things worked in the Johnson household. Actually, let me paint you 2 pictures, side by side. For contrast. Picture 1. Ashley at 18, screaming with joy next to a cherry red Ford Mustang convertible. Brand new. The kind of car that makes heads turn and insurance agents cry. Dad stood there with his chest puffed out like a proud rooster, announcing to the neighborhood that nothing was too good for his princess. Picture 2, me at 18, clutching a bus schedule and getting a lecture about how real men aren't afraid of public transportation. Apparently, real men also aren't afraid of pneumonia from waiting at bus stops in November rain. Character building, they called it. I called it hypothermia with a side of humility. The car thing was just the opening act, though. The real headliner came a few years later when Mom and Dad hit a rough patch with their mortgage. Nothing dramatic, just life being life. Dad's hours got cut, Mom's dental work wasn't cheap, and suddenly those monthly payments looked like Mount Everest. I was 27, barely 3 years into my career, still drowning in my own student loans. But family is family, right? So for an entire year, I helped them make those payments. My own dreams of saving for a down payment got shelved. My apartment remained my apartment. My furniture remained a creative combination of IKEA's cheapest options and things I found on the curb with free signs. When things stabilized, Mom cried and said they'd be in my debt forever. Forever turned out to be a very flexible term. Kind of like those free refill signs at cafes that technically exist, but nobody's ever actually seen them honor it after the second cup. You know what I mean? But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where I loaded the gun that would eventually be pointed at my own head, though I didn't know it at the time. Last Christmas, I decided to do something different. I was tired of the cycle, tired of being the emergency fund. I wanted to teach them to fish instead of just handing them fish every time they got hungry. So I put together what I thought was a thoughtful gift. I bought this beautiful wooden frame and mounted a symbolic first dollar inside it. Underneath, I printed a little card explaining that this represented their first dollar of financial freedom. I'd open a Roth IRA in their names and put $5,000 in it as a starting investment for their retirement. Real money, real planning, real future. Ashley was there when I gave it to them. Of course she was. She rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't get stuck looking at her brain. She actually said, and I quote, that IRA sounded like some government agency that monitors boring people. She said we should live in the moment. Easy philosophy when someone else is paying for your moments, I guess. Mom and Dad smiled politely. They thanked me. It was nice. It was fine. Then Dad pulled me aside about an hour later, after the dishes were done, and everyone was settling into that post-dinner food coma. He had this look on his face. Serious but casual. The kind of look a con man probably practices in the mirror. He said the IRA was a great idea, really thoughtful. But could I do him a favor? Could I make him a joint owner on the account instead of just a beneficiary? He had this whole explanation ready. It was just a formality, he said, just in case something happened to me, God forbid. So they wouldn't have to run around dealing with courts and lawyers and probate. It would just make things simpler to manage, make things easier all around. I didn't see the trap. I didn't see the knife being sharpened. I saw my dad asking for a simple paperwork change that made logical sense. So I said, sure. Of course, Dad. Whatever makes it easier. I actually thought he meant easier for bureaucracy. Turns out he meant easier to stab me in the back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The thing about being the responsible one in the family is that it becomes your identity. It becomes a box they put you in. And once you're in that box, getting out is like trying to escape from a maximum security prison using a spoon. People expect you to be responsible. They count on it. They build their entire financial strategy around it. I didn't choose to be the reliable son. It just happened. Good grades turned into a decent job. A decent job turned into financial stability. Financial stability turned into being the person everyone called when the furnace died, when the car broke down, when life happened and money was needed. And the worst part? I enabled it. Every single time I said yes, I reinforced the pattern. Every time I transferred money without asking questions, I taught them that the Bank of Mike was always open for business. No credit check required. No collateral needed. Just call and funds appear like magic. Meanwhile, Ashley was out there living her best life. And I mean that literally. She had a vision board. She talked about manifesting abundance. She posted Instagram stories about gratitude and the universe providing. The universe provided. All right. It provided parents who took out loans to pay for her dreams while I financed their ability to do it. But I didn't see it yet. Not clearly. I saw pieces of the puzzle, but I couldn't make out the full picture. I thought I was being a good son. I thought responsibility was a virtue. I thought sacrifice meant something. There's this quote I read somewhere. The most expensive thing you can pay for is someone else's dream. At the time, I thought it was deep. Now I know it's just the truth wearing a fancy outfit. Jake listened to all of this and just shook his head. He didn't say I told you so, but his face said it loud enough. He asked me the question I've been avoiding. When was the last time they asked how I was doing? Not what I could do for them, but how I was actually doing. I couldn't answer. The silence stretched out between us like a canyon. He bought the next round. We didn't talk about it any more that night. We talked about sports, about his kids' soccer games, about anything else. But the question hung in the air like smoke, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Driving home that night, the streets were empty. Just me, the hum of my engine, and Jake's question playing on repeat in my head. When was the last time? I tried to remember. Christmas? Thanksgiving? My birthday? Nothing. The answer was nothing. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a minute. The celebration beer from earlier had gone warm on my desk. The confetti on my laptop screen had probably disappeared by now. The congratulations message was gone. Just like my $1,200. Just like everything else. Inside, my apartment looked exactly the same as it had for 5 years. Thin walls. Tiny kitchen. That crack in the ceiling. I kept meaning to tell the landlord about. It had been there for 2 years now. spreading slowly across the plaster like a spider web. I stared at that crack. Funny how you don't notice these things growing until one day you look up and realize they've taken over the entire surface. Cracks in ceilings. Cracks in families. Same principle, different materials. While I was taking out loans and riding buses in the rain, they were buying Ashley a Mustang with cash. While I was helping pay their mortgage, she was getting her education funded without a second thought. The math didn't add up. It never had. I'd just been too busy being the good son to notice. My phone buzzed. Mom, sending a goodnight text with 3 heart emojis. I love you, honey. Sleep well. I typed back the same. But Jake's question wouldn't let me sleep. And then, standing there in my kitchen at midnight, another thought crept in, cold and uninvited. That Roth IRA paperwork. Dad had been so insistent about the joint ownership, so prepared with his explanation, so smooth. Just a formality, he'd said, just in case something happens to you. At the time, it had sounded like a father caring about logistics. Now, in the dark silence of my apartment, it sounded like something else entirely. Something planned. Something deliberate. I pushed the thought away. I was being paranoid. These were my parents. They loved me. Family takes care of family. But the crack in the ceiling seemed wider than before. And Jake's question wouldn't stop echoing. 3 weeks after that conversation with Jake, I got the text. Mom, family dinner this Saturday at 7. Ashley picked the place. We're something nice. I should have known right then. Ashley never picked casual spots. She picked places with valet parking and menus without prices. Places where the waiters wore ties and introduced themselves like you were about to become lifelong friends. Places designed to make you feel like you were celebrating something even if you were just eating overpriced chicken. But I went anyway, because that's what you do when you're the good son, even when you're starting to wonder what good it's actually doing you. The restaurant was called Luminaire, not Luminary, which would have at least been spelled correctly. Luminaire, with an E, very French. Very expensive. Very Ashley. The hostess walked us through a maze of tables with white tablecloths that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Everything sparkled. Crystal. Silver. The kind of place where they put your napkin on your lap for you, which always makes me uncomfortable. I'm 35. I can handle my own napkin. Thanks. Ashley was already there. Of course. She'd arrived early to make sure we got the best table, the one by the window with the view of the city lights. She was wearing something designer that I couldn't name, but could definitely estimate the cost of 3 digits minimum, maybe 4. Mom and Dad looked nervous. Excited, but nervous. Like they had news that was either going to go really well or really badly, and they weren't sure which. Dad kept adjusting his tie. Mom kept touching her necklace. These were their tells, the things they did when something big was coming. We ordered drinks. Ashley got champagne. Of course. I got water. Someone had to be able to drive home without worrying about DUIs, and I was pretty sure that someone was going to be me. The small talk lasted through the appetizers. How's work, Mike? Fine. How's your apartment, Mike? Fine. How's life, Mike? Fine. Nobody asked any follow-up questions. Nobody asked what fine actually meant. Fine was enough. Fine was safe. Fine meant we could move on to the important stuff. Then Dad stood up. He actually stood up, in the middle of a crowded restaurant. He pushed back his chair and got to his feet, with his champagne glass raised like he was about to give a toast at a wedding. Here we go, I thought. Whatever this is, it's big enough to require a standing ovation from himself. He cleared his throat. The tables around us didn't notice or care, but our little family unit was locked in. Mom was beaming. Ashley was glowing. I was just sitting there with my water, watching this scene unfold like a movie I'd accidentally bought tickets for. Dad announced that today was a big day, a monumental day, a day that would change everything. They'd made the most important investment in their future. They'd taken out a second mortgage on the house, the same house I'd helped them keep 3 years ago, and they'd done something incredible with it. They'd paid off Ashley's student loans. All of them. Every single cent. $369,000. Let that number sink in for a second. $369,000 for a degree in art history from a private university in New York, and 4 years of living in Manhattan, like she was auditioning for a reality show about trust fund kids. For that money, you could buy a house. A nice house. Not in Manhattan, obviously, but in most of the country, you could buy a house with a yard and a garage, and maybe even a pool. You could buy a small art gallery and hang her diploma in it as the only exhibit. You could buy 7 Ford Mustangs. You could change someone's entire life, and they'd use it to erase Ashley's consequences. Ashley was crying. Happy tears. The kind that come with gratitude and relief and the knowledge that you've dodged a bullet you probably deserve to take. Mom was hugging her. Dad was still standing there with his champagne glass up like he'd just announced peace in the Middle East. The other diners who'd noticed were smiling at our table. Look at that lovely family, celebrating something wonderful. How nice. How heartwarming. I sat there like a statue. My face was a mask. I could feel a hardening. My expression going neutral in that way it does when you're trying not to show what you're actually feeling. When you're trying to hold everything in, because if you let even a crack show, the whole dam is going to burst. Mom noticed. Of course she noticed. Mothers always notice when their children aren't performing happiness correctly. She leaned over and touched my arm, her voice low and gentle. "Come on, honey," she said. "Be happy for your sister. Don't ruin the evening. Don't ruin the evening." As if my face was a problem. As if the issue here was my inability to plaster on a smile while they celebrated flushing enough money down the drain to change my entire life trajectory. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet break, like a guitar string that's been tightened one turn too many. I looked at Mom, then at Dad, who'd finally sat down, then at Ashley, who was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin that probably cost $5. I kept my voice low. Quiet. The kind of quiet that's more dangerous than yelling. I said I'd spent 10 years paying off $98,000. A decade of my life. I'd paid their mortgage for a year to keep them from losing the house they'd just mortgage again. I'd given up my own dreams, my own timeline, my own plans. I asked if my investment had been less important, if my decade of sacrifice had been worth less than her 4 years of brunch in Soho. The table went silent. You could have heard a pin drop, if pins made any sound when they dropped on carpet this thick. Dad's face changed. The proud father expression evaporated, replaced by something harder, irritation, maybe even anger. He'd been having such a nice moment, and here I was ruining it with math and feelings. He said I was different. I was strong. I could handle things. They'd always known that about me. They'd helped the one who needed it. Ashley was a creative soul. She wasn't built for the burden of debt. She needed freedom to flourish, to find herself, to become who she was meant to be. The creative soul in question was sitting there looking at me like I just told her Santa wasn't real, wounded and offended that I dare to question the natural order of things. Then Ashley spoke up. Her voice had that edge to it, that superiority mixed with pity. She said maybe I should have learned to ask for help instead of carrying around all that pride like a badge of honor. Maybe if I just learned to visualize success and put my intentions out into the universe, things would have worked out for me too. The universe. She actually said the universe. I wanted to tell her that the universe she was talking about had a name, and it was second mortgage on the house your brother saved. I wanted to tell her that visualization is a lot easier when someone else is paying your rent. I wanted to tell her so many things, but I didn't, because what was the point? I could see it now, crystal clear, the pattern I'd been too close to notice. They hadn't invested in me, because I didn't need investment. I was self-sufficient, self-funding, a renewable resource that required no maintenance. Ashley was an investment that required capital. She was a high-risk, high-maintenance asset that needed constant injections of cash to keep operating. And they decided, probably years ago, that she was worth it and I wasn't. Not because she was better, not because she was more deserving, but because she demanded it and I didn't, because she made noise and I stayed quiet, because I'd been stupid enough to be competent. There's a special kind of pain that comes from realizing your family loves you, but they don't respect you. They appreciate what you can do for them, but they don't value who you are. You're useful. You're reliable. You're the emergency contact they call when things go wrong. But you're not the one they celebrate. You're not the one they invest in. You're not the one they take out a second mortgage for. You're just the one who keeps the lights on while everyone else chases their dreams. I stood up, slowly, calmly. I pulled my wallet out and counted out enough cash to cover my meal, my drink, and a generous tip, because the waiter didn't deserve to suffer for my family's dysfunction. I placed it carefully on the table. Nobody said anything. They just watched me with these confused, slightly hurt expressions, like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Ashley's mouth was open. Mom's hand was frozen halfway to her glass. Dad looked like he was trying to decide whether to be angry or embarrassed. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say congratulations. I didn't say anything at all. I just walked out. The valet brought my car. I tipped him. My hands move on autopilot, pulling out bills, handing them over. He said something. I didn't hear it. I drove. Stop signs. Red lights. Turn signals. The city lights blurred together through the windshield like someone had smeared Vaseline across my vision. My brain kept replaying the same moment on loop. Dad standing there with his champagne glass. That number. $369,000. For her. Nothing for me. The drive home took 15 minutes. Or maybe 40. Time felt broken, like a clock with missing numbers. I only knew I'd arrived when I was already sitting in my parking spot with the engine off, staring at my apartment building. When had I gotten here? Had I run any red lights? Had I signaled my turns? I didn't remember. I didn't care. Inside, my apartment looked different. Smaller. Shabbier. The contrast with luminaire hit me like a physical force. Crystal chandeliers versus my IKEA lamp. White tablecloths versus my thrift store couch. Their celebration versus my ceiling crack. I sat down in the dark. Didn't turn on the lights. Didn't turn on the TV. Just sat there in the silence, listening to my neighbor's muffled television through the thin walls. My phone buzzed. Mom. Was I okay? She was worried. She loved me. Why did I leave like that? I stared at the screen until it went dark. $369,000. 10 years of my life paying off $98,000. The math didn't add up. It never had. I'd just been too busy being responsible to notice. You teach people how to treat you. Some poster in some break room somewhere had told me that once. I thought it was about boundaries, about self-respect, about standing up for yourself. I'd taught them perfectly. I taught them I'd always show up, always help, always say yes. I taught them my needs came last. My dreams could wait. My life mattered less. And they'd learned every single lesson. I fell asleep on that couch, still wearing the nice clothes Mom had told me to wear. When I woke up hours later, my neck was stiff and the apartment was still dark. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. That crack in my ceiling was still there. Jake's question was still echoing. And somewhere across town, my family was probably still celebrating, wondering why I had to make everything about me. The worst part? If the furnace broke next month, they'd call. And part of me, the part that had been the good son for 35 years, would want to answer. That was the part one needed to kill, before it killed me first. 3 weeks passed. Maybe 4. Time had this weird quality to it, like I was moving through water. I went to work. I came home. I ordered takeout. I watched shows I didn't remember the next day. I existed, but I wasn't really living. Jake called a few times. I let it go to voicemail. Mom texted every couple of days with increasingly worried messages that I responded to with single words. Fine. Busy. Later. The bare minimum to prove I was still alive without actually engaging. I wasn't mad anymore. That's the weird part. I was just empty. Like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that used to care about family dinners and birthday cards, and the idea that blood meant something permanent. Then the mail came. I was standing in my apartment in sweatpants and a t-shirt I'd worn for 2 days, sorting through the usual garbage. Credit card offers. grocery store coupons, a flyer for a gym I'd never join, and then at the bottom of the stack, a thick envelope with the logo of Fidelity Investments, my Roth IRA annual statement. I usually threw these straight in the recycling. I knew roughly what was in there. $5,000 initial deposit, plus whatever minimal growth the market had given me. Nothing exciting. Nothing that required my immediate attention. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the weight of the envelope. Maybe it was some subconscious warning bell. Maybe it was just that I had nothing better to do than torture myself with financial statements. I opened it. The first page was standard stuff. Account holder information, tax implications, boring legal language that nobody actually reads. I flipped to the summary page, and that's when my brain short-circuited. Account balance, $473. I stared at that number, blinked, read it again. $473. Not $5,000. Not $5,000 plus interest. $473. Where the hell had $4,500 gone? My hand started shaking as I flipped through the pages. Transaction history. There had to be an explanation, a mistake, a clerical error, something. And then I found it. December 28th, 2 weeks after Christmas. 1 week after I'd signed those papers making Dad a joint owner. Transaction type, collateral transfer. Amount, $4,500. Authorized by joint account holder. The world tilted sideways. I sat down hard on my couch, the papers scattered across my lap like evidence at a crime scene, which, I guess, is exactly what they were. Collateral transfer. I knew what that meant. I'd worked in finance long enough to understand the terminology. When you don't have enough assets to secure a loan, you offer additional collateral, something of value that the bank can claim if you default. They'd use my money, the money I'd given them as a gift for their retirement, the money I'd put in their names to help them build a future. They'd use it as collateral to get the loan that paid off Ashley's $369,000 mistake. And Dad had been able to do it because I'd made him a joint owner, because he'd asked and I'd trusted, and I'd signed my name on a form without questioning why. I should have been furious. I should have been screaming. I should have been calling lawyers and demanding justice and setting things on fire. But I wasn't. I started laughing. It started quiet, almost silent. Then it built, this awful sound coming out my throat that didn't sound like me at all. It was a laugh of someone who'd just heard the punchline to the darkest joke in the universe. The laugh of someone who'd finally understood how completely they'd been played. Because it was genius, really. Objectively speaking, it was a masterpiece of manipulation. They hadn't just taken my gift. They hadn't just betrayed my trust. They'd used my signature, my legal consent, my own documented agreement to make Dad a joint owner. They'd taken my care, my concern for their future, my desperate attempt to teach them financial responsibility, and they'd weaponized it. They'd turned my generosity into collateral for her irresponsibility. It wasn't just betrayal. It was art. Horrible, soul-crushing art. And I'd been the one holding the paintbrush the whole time, signing my name on the canvas without reading what I was creating. The laughter died. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. And what replaced it was something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not sadness. Something colder, clearer. Rage burns hot and fades fast. This wasn't rage. This was ice forming over a lake, crystal clear and strong enough to walk on. This was every emotion I'd ever felt about my family crystallizing into something sharp and precise. The fog lifted. All those years of guilt, of obligation, of thinking maybe I wasn't doing enough, maybe I wasn't being fair, maybe I was a problem. Gone. Evaporated like morning dew. I saw it all with perfect mathematical clarity now. They'd made their choice. Not at that dinner 3 weeks ago. That had just been the announcement. They'd made their choice last December, when Dad asked me to make him a joint owner. Maybe they'd made it years before that. Maybe they'd made it the day Ashley was born and became the princess, while I became the workhorse. But the choice had been made, and I'd been too busy being responsible to see the scoreboard. Asset number 1, Ashley. Total family investment, $394,000 and counting. Return on investment, 0. Current status, living with parents, no job, no prospects, no plan. Asset number 2, Mike. Total family investment, 0. Contribution to family, roughly $30,000 over 10 years. Current status, self-sufficient, employed, financially stable without their help because he'd never gotten their help. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. I sat there on my couch with those papers spread around me like tarot cards revealing my fortune, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not breaking, not healing, transforming. I'd spent 35 years being the good son, the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who sacrificed, the one who believed that family meant something more than blood and shared DNA and legal obligations. I'd been wrong. Family wasn't an identity. It was a contract, and contracts can be terminated when one party fails to uphold their end of the deal. I picked up my phone, opened a new text to Mom, Dad, and Ashley. Group message. Efficient. The text was simple. Family meeting at my place. Saturday at 2. Important. Be there. Mom responded within 30 seconds. Of course, honey. Is everything okay? I didn't answer. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them spend the next few days trying to figure out what this was about, running through possibilities, maybe even feeling a tiny fraction of the anxiety they'd put me through for years. I had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to build what was going to be the most important presentation of my life. Not for them, for me. Saturday came. I'd spent 72 hours building my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. Spreadsheets, documents, bank statements. Every receipt, every transaction, every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. My apartment was spotless. I cleaned like I was preparing for a military inspection. Everything in its place. Nothing out of order. The physical manifestation of the mental clarity I'd finally achieved. I'd borrowed a projector from work. Told them I needed it for a personal project. They didn't ask questions. I'd set up facing my blank wall, tested it twice, made sure the slides advanced smoothly. This wasn't going to be an emotional confrontation. This wasn't going to be tears and accusations and raised voices. This was going to be business. Cold, professional, final. They arrived together. Of course they did. Safety in numbers. Dad looked uncomfortable in khakis and a button-down, like he'd dressed for a job interview. Mom wore her church outfit, the one that said respectable and concerned. Ashley showed up in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, like she just rolled out of bed, which she probably had. They filed into my small apartment, and I could see them taking in the changes. The clean space, the projector, the laptop open on my coffee table, the 3 chairs I borrowed from my neighbor, positioned facing the blank wall. Nobody said anything. The air was thick with unasked questions. I gestured to the chairs. They sat. I dimmed the lights and turned on the projector. The first slide appeared on my wall in crisp corporate font. Johnson Family Investment Portfolio, a comprehensive analysis. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Dad's jaw tightened. Ashley looked confused, like she'd walked into the wrong movie theater. I didn't smile, didn't make eye contact. I just advanced to the next slide. Asset number 1, Ashley Johnson. The bullet points appeared. Total family investment, $394,000. Education, $369,000. Vehicle, $25,000. Living expenses, age 18 to 26, estimated $50,000 minimum. Return on investment, 0%. Current annual income, $0. Asset status, illiquid. Risk assessment, high. Projected future returns, negative. I let that sit for a moment. Watched Ashley's face go from confused to offended to something like shame. Watched Dad shift in his seat. Watched Mom's eyes fill with tears that I felt nothing about. Next slide. Asset number 2, Mike Johnson. New bullet points. Total family investment, $0. Education. Self-financed, $98,000. Vehicle, self-financed, $15,000. Living expenses, age 18 to 35, self-financed. Contributions to family financial stability, $30,000 minimum. Current annual income, $78,000. Asset status, divested. Risk assessment, 0. Projected future returns, none. Another slide. This one was a timeline. Every date, I'd helped them financially. Every amount, every emergency. Every time the Bank of Mike had opened its doors and handed over cash with no expectation of repayment. December 15, 3 years ago, $1,200 for furnace repair. March 8, 2 years ago, $800 for car transmission. July 22, 4 years ago, $12,000, 1 full year of mortgage assistance. On and on. The list was longer than I'd realized when I started building it. By the time I finished totaling everything, I'd given them $32,000 over 10 years. Not loaned, given. And they'd use my gift, my Roth IRA, as collateral to pay for Ashley's consequences without even telling me. I advanced to the next slide. This one was just a photograph I'd scanned. The framed first dollar from Christmas. The Roth IRA gift that had become a weapon. Then the bank statement showing the collateral transfer. Then the text of the conversation where Dad had asked me to make him a joint owner, just for paperwork. He'd said, just to make things easier. He'd said, the silence in my apartment was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Final slide. Portfolio rebalancing, effective immediately. I turned to face them for the first time since starting the presentation. My voice was calm, professional. The voice I use in business meetings when presenting quarterly reports. I told them I hadn't gathered them for accusations. I hadn't gathered them for apologies. I'd gathered them to announce my financial decision. The analysis was clear, I said. They'd made their primary investment. They'd put all their chips on one number. They'd even supplemented that bet with my money, taken without my knowledge but with my legal consent. It was a bold strategy, a risky one, but it was their choice. Therefore, effective immediately, I was divesting from the Johnson family portfolio. I told them their sole investment going forward was Ashley. She was their retirement plan now. She was their emergency fund. She was their safety net and their insurance policy and their backup plan. My involvement in their financial life was terminated, not paused, not reduced, terminated. The Bank of Mike was permanently closed. No exceptions. No emergencies. No special circumstances. I wish them luck with their investment strategy. I turned off the projector. The room was suddenly too bright, with the normal lights back on. They sat there, all three of them, looking like I just explained that the sky was actually green and water flowed uphill. Dad opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally managed to say that I was being unreasonable. They'd made a mistake. They knew that. But family forgives. Family helps each other. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd taught me to ride a bike and help with my math homework and told me he was proud when I got my first real job. This man who'd also let me struggle alone for 10 years while pouring everything into my sister. This man who'd taken my gift and used it as collateral without a word. I told him he was right about one thing. Family does help each other. I'd learned that lesson perfectly. I'd helped them for years, for decades, and they'd helped Ashley. They'd made their choice about which family member deserved their investment. I was simply respecting that choice and removing myself from the equation. Mom was crying now. Real tears, not the polite ones. She said I was her son. She loved me. Didn't that mean anything? And here's the thing. It did mean something. It meant I'd wasted years thinking love and respect were the same thing. It meant I'd confused emotional manipulation with affection. It meant I'd been so desperate to be valued that I'd accepted being used as the next best thing. But I didn't say that. I just stood up and walked to my door. Opened it. They got the message. Ashley was the last to leave. She stopped in the doorway, and for a second I thought she might actually apologize, might actually acknowledge what they'd done. But she just looked at me with this expression of wounded confusion, like I'd betrayed her by refusing to be her safety net anymore. She said I'd regret this. That family was forever. that someday I'd need them and they wouldn't be there. I told her she was probably right. Someday I might need help, might need support, might need someone to lean on, and I'd handle it the same way I'd handled everything else in my life. Alone. She left. The door closed. And I was by myself in my small, clean apartment with the projector still set up and the evidence of my entire financial relationship with my family scattered across my coffee table. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. Still, like I'd been holding my breath for 35 years and had finally exhaled. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for things to change, for lives to shift, for consequences to catch up. I'm standing on the deck of my house right now. Not an apartment. A house. Small but mine. Paid for with money I saved by not being anyone's emergency fund. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A kitchen that's barely big enough for 1 person. But it's got a view of a lake and a yard where my dog can run around. Yeah, I got a dog. Rescued him from a shelter 3 years ago. Some mixed breed that nobody wanted because he was too old and not cute enough. We understood each other immediately. I see the car coming up my driveway before I hear it. Old, probably held together with duct tape and hope. It wheezes to a stop and 2 people get out. Mom and Dad. They've aged. More than 5 years should account for. Dad moves slower, like his joints hurt. Mom's hair is completely gray now. They both look smaller somehow, like life has been pressing down on them and they've compressed under the weight. They don't have Ashley with them. That tells me everything I need to know before they even open their mouths. I don't go down to meet them. I stay on my deck with my grill going and my dog lying in the sun. I watch them walk up my steps, and I see the exact moment they take in what I built. The house. The peace. The life I've created without them. Dad clears his throat. Says it's good to see me. That I look well. That the place is nice. I thank him. Polite. Distant. The way you'd thank a stranger who held a door open. Mom gets to the point faster. Always did. She says Ashley's living with them. Has been for 2 years. The job in New York didn't work out. Or the one after that. Or the one after that. And the second mortgage is due. The bank sent letters. They're going to lose the house. She says they need help. One last time. Just enough to get them through. I flip the steaks on my grill. The sizzle is loud in the silence. My dog lifts his head, sniffs the air, goes back to sleep. Life is simple here. Quiet. Exactly how I like it. I look at my parents. These people who made me, who raised me, who taught me everything I know about responsibility and sacrifice and showing up, who also taught me that being reliable means being exploitable. That being strong means being ignored. That being good means being taken for granted. I walk inside. They think I'm getting my checkbook. I can see the hope bloom on their faces, desperate and sad. I come back out with 2 bottles of water from my fridge. Cold, expensive brand. The kind I can afford now that I'm not funding anyone's poor decisions. I hand them the bottles. I tell them I'm sorry to hear about their difficulties. Really, it's a hard situation. Losing a house is traumatic. I understand that. I kept them from losing it once before, after all. But my financial decision from 5 years ago remains unchanged. They made their investment. They chose their asset. They secure a loan against my gift without telling me, betting everything on one outcome. That outcome is their responsibility now, not mine. They have their investment. I say, Ashley is their retirement plan, their emergency fund, their safety net. They should reach out to her for assistance. Mom starts crying. Dad's face goes red, then white. He says I can't be serious. We're family, blood. That has to mean something. And I realize he's right. It does mean something. It means I share their DNA. It means we have history. It means I carry their genetics and their last name and probably some of their mannerisms I don't even realize. But it doesn't mean I owe them my future to pay for their past. It doesn't mean I have to light myself on fire to keep them warm. It doesn't mean their choices become my consequences. I don't say this, though. I just watch them walk back to their car. Watch them drive away, taking their problems with them. Problems that used to be mine by default. My dog comes over and puts his head on my knee. I scratch behind his ears. The stakes are ready. The sun is setting over the lake. The air smells like pine and charcoal and freedom. I'm not rich. I'm not even particularly successful by conventional standards. I'm just a guy with a small house and a rescue dog and a job that pays the bills. I don't have a family that calls on holidays. I don't have a safety net if things go wrong. But I have something better. I have peace. I have autonomy. I have a life built on my own terms, funded by my own work, designed around my own values. I don't have to wonder when the next emergency call is coming. Don't have to calculate how much I can spare this month. Don't have to perform gratitude for being allowed to help. The bank of Mike is closed. The doors are locked. The vault is empty. And I've never been richer.